Very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Aarti Nagaraj, editor of Gulf Business, and we're looking forward to an interesting session on e-commerce hosted by Gulf Business in partnership with Dubai CommerCity. Invariably, all of us have noticed that every discussion we have these days has some link to the pandemic. Either starts with it, there's somewhere pandemic impact that's mentioned, and for good reason, because it's affected the way we do business, the way we work, the way we live. And while many sectors were adversely hit, and some are starting to recover right now, others faced a different kind of a problem. That was how to cope with the demand. I'll share some numbers here. In the first 5 months of 2020, the UAE saw a 300% increase in demand for e-commerce services among customers. And overall, the GCC's e-commerce market is expected to be worth roughly $50 billion by 2025. That's according to a report by Kearney Middle East. With rising demand, what we also saw was a mushrooming of e-commerce players in the market across different sectors. Again, I'll cite some numbers here. In May 2020 alone, e-commerce represented the highest number of licenses issued to any business sector in the UAE. But what we've also seen is that the strain has been hard. We saw some players shut shop just because they couldn't cope with weaving all the elements of the business together. We've also seen a lot of retailers and brands struggling to move into the e-commerce vertical profitably. So what are the key areas that any startup or any company needs to focus on when they start an e-commerce business in Dubai? To answer that question, we have with us a very, very esteemed panel of industry experts. Please join me in welcoming DeVere Forster. He's the COO of Dubai CommerCity. DeVere is here. Thanks for joining us, DeVere. We also have with us Deepak Chandran. He's the Senior Vice President and Head of Cards at Emirates NBD. Then we have Pankaj Asthaana. He's the Vice President, Digital Payments and Labs, Mastercard MENA region. Thanks, Pankaj. And we also have Ben Mclean. He's the head of e-commerce UAE at DHL Express. Thank you so much. It's a very interesting and well-rounded panel that we have here, and I know all of you are waiting to hear their insights. But just before we start the discussion, a quick reminder of the format that we have. During the session, there is a Q&A button that you can see on your screen. So any questions that you have relevant to the discussion, feel free to post them, and we'll take them up as the discussion goes. We also have time for a brief Q&A at the end of the discussion. So if there's anything that you would like to ask them directly, you can keep your questions for that. Do follow us on social at Gulf Business on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And we're live streaming this session on Facebook. So any further questions that you have, you can leave your comments there, and then we'll revert back to you. So without further ado, we'll start with the discussion. Thank you all so much for joining me here today. The first question, I think, and coming back to the pandemic, what is the current state of Dubai's, and I would say the wider UAE's, GCC's e-commerce industry? What has been the impact on operations? DeVere, maybe if we can start with you.
Yeah, sure, Aarti. Hi, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start off with the latest set of figures for the MENA region that we've just published at Dubai CommerCity that show e-commerce product sales of around 89 billion US dollars for 2019. That equates to about 2.5% of the global e-commerce market. Now, while this is a relatively small portion, the region's e-commerce market is expected to witness CAGR rates of over 18% between 2019 and 2022, and that's much higher than the global average of around 16%. If we focus on the numbers by country within the MENA region, Pakistan is the fastest growing e-commerce market with a rate of around 41%. This is followed very closely by Saudi Arabia, 39%, and the UAE very, very close behind that at 38%. Now, not surprisingly, much of this growth has been driven by the change of consumer behavior due to the COVID pandemic. What I have seen as the impact of the pandemic on the operations has been the following. It's accelerated the need for retailers and brands that didn't already have e-commerce capabilities to build and launch a digital platform, or for them to refocus and reprioritize what they were doing in the e-commerce space. It's also stretched and in many cases brought the physical operations aspect of e-commerce business to a breaking point due to the sudden and sustained growth and rate of orders. Simply put, many have been really caught out by not being able to gear up their operations from what is now known as the new norm. For example, many warehouses and fulfillment centers have not been designed with sufficient storage or space to allow for an increased stock holding. They don't have scalable WMS solutions to allow for additional pick locations. They have not invested in semi-automation pick solutions to optimize the space or speed of order picking. And they don't feed real-time stock inventory updates to the e-commerce front end, resulting in inaccurate stock levels, which simply drive failed picks and cancelled orders. Sure. And finally, consumer expectations for the same instant gratification that they get when buying offline has resulted in the need for same-day and next-day delivery propositions. This means fulfilling of online orders needs to be as close to the end user as possible. So completely relying on cross-border shipping may not be viable in the medium to long term.
Deepak, from a bank's perspective, what is it that you have seen, because you deal quite closely with a lot of e-commerce players, what is it that you have seen in the market?
Good afternoon, Aarti, and to the panel. I think 2 or 3 trends, Aarti. I think first is, I think when we went through the shutdown phase, I think conventional shopping had to be reimagined, right, for customers. So
Correct.
Customers realized convenience, even the convenience bit of grocery and pharmacies had to be done online. So we definitely saw a shift in consumer behavior. In fact, some of those numbers I'm hoping sustain and it augurs well for the industry as a whole. So we almost saw what traditionally would have been a 30-40% of transactions being e-commerce. I think it almost doubled to about 60% of the total volume. But mind it, in the lockdown, the overall volumes also dropped on the traditional heavyweights like travel and hospitality, right? So that was the first piece. So the one is the convenience piece. Second, like deVere rightly said, we saw, well, we've always consciously tried to grow because this is where the customer is going at the end of the day, right? Traditional shopping over a period of time, we've seen globally, there'll be a balance, but would shift to e-commerce. So we've also seen a lot more of our partners wanting to talk about their e-commerce offerings actually across the board, where including our partners like Lulu, for example, where they've always done traditional in-shop. They started promoting their e-commerce website. Okay. And the good thing about the UAE market as a whole, and I'm sure Pankaj will talk about it, I think over the last few years, the e-commerce habit has grown pretty well thanks to, I would say, in a large part to the government efforts, right? The whole cashless drive and wanting more people to pay digitally. So starting with even the government services, everything had already moved to a digital front. So we've also seen naturally a part of the customers migrating to this front. But I guess over time we will figure out whether people will do all their shopping or is it going to be restricted to certain categories. But definitely a lot more of change where people, I would say for e-commerce players, the cost of acquisition has dropped dramatically for the last few months.
Across the UAE, you would say?
Definitely, because I think here now it's a need, right? It's no longer a marketing way to throw in an offer to get the customer onboarded, right? You've had customers naturally moving into the platform. So that's definitely helped us as a whole from an industry perspective. And from banking, one other trend, obviously, overall, if I look at it, is obviously this is not just on the traditional credit card. We're also seeing a lot more of people with debit cards using it online. So that's also good overall, where the whole security part is being, I guess, crossed over by the customer.
Pankaj, he didn't mention you, and what is it that you've seen from a payments perspective? I mean, that's a huge part of the whole e-commerce equation. So what is it that you've noticed?
Absolutely. I think adding to what Deepak just mentioned, COVID has accelerated a secular shift that was already being witnessed to e-commerce. We saw a very strong surge in segments like grocery and pharmacy during the COVID lockdown. And to Deepak's point, yes, you have to take it with a consideration that in-store payments were going down. So we'll probably see the share of e-commerce normalizing, and we're already seeing that trend with respect to the overall payments that are being done. But a couple of interesting additional points I would make, and I think which is a big testament to the resilience of the banking structure of the UAE market, has been that our biggest concern as a scheme has been that traditionally e-commerce payments tend to operate with lower approval rates and higher fraud rates as compared to in-store payments.
Okay.
And in-store payments, but what we have seen over the last 1 year is that the banking industry has done a fantastic job managing the risks. So the risks, definitely the attempts were increased. The people did try to, game the system, but the investment in the fraud tools and the controls that have been applied have proven to be quite robust. So I think one major learning, which is going to give us ongoing dividends, is the confidence that the e-commerce payment system has come of age, and now you can confidently make transactions online. So that's one major hoop that has been accelerated, which will give us continued dividends. The second thing I would talk about, apart from security, is convenience. A spectacular growth of e-commerce has been on smart devices, right? So we're not talking about people going to computers and making transactions. We're talking about a leapfrog where the idea of commerce has moved to the smartphone and the smart device. And I think this is, again, a trend that we're going to see sustain. And if I link it back to the point we made on segments like grocery and pharmacy, I think people will use it more frequently, and that's going to be good for the overall health of digital spending in the market. And the last thing that I would sort of link as a major trend that sort of happened over the last 1 year is the emergence of card on file solutions. And what does that mean for the long-term perspective on how consumers will transact? So there's a overbearing share of card on file transactions within e-commerce now, and this share continues to grow dramatically. What that does mean is that consumers' confidence in convenience, and confidence in the system, and their trust to use, their trust is at a level where they are now looking for convenience. They don't mind putting their cards in places so that the transaction can be faster. And this is a major change, because along with the security layer and this confidence, we are now setting ourselves for doing even more bespoke and more specialized payment experiences like voice commerce or facial recognition based commerce, or even other kinds of electronic commerce can be opened up, because now you can say that the underlying confidence in the system has definitely accelerated over the last 1 year due to COVID.
Interesting. We were just discussing earlier, Ben, we were discussing about this point of the shift that's happened away from COD in a sense. Has that, from your perspective, what is it that you've seen in terms of the impact of the pandemic? Is it the shift that's happened? And for e-commerce players, how have they managed the situation and increased demand?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, RT. Good afternoon, everyone else. I think there's some interesting points made there. I mean, look, COD's been in and around the region for a long time, but I think over a period, a lot of sellers have been trying to educate their customers. They try to give different payment solutions. That's why it's really pleasing to hear all the work that's been done. I mean, if you look at the fintech space at the moment, there's a huge amount of investment, especially with like buy now, pay later. We're seeing obviously a lot of mobilization of these sort of debit cards in countries. For example, DeVere was talking about Pakistan. Obviously, as a market, we see that as a hypermarket. We're seeing that now open up. So I think being able to make purchase a lot easier for the consumers, obviously building that confidence. And I think just on that, we're now seeing that we're going through the realms of, originally it was about buying, the availability of products, then it was the price of the product, then it was convenience. I think we're now going into the realms of customer experience. I don't think you can really have that when you're offering a sort of cash on delivery product. And really what I mean by that is, if you think about it, my CFO always says this to me, so hopefully he's not on the call. Sales is vanity and money in the bank is sanity. Even though I never agree with him in person, it's actually true. So, I mean, this really talks to what we're talking about today, the profitability of a business. If you think now, if you look at Saudi being the biggest market in terms of cross-border e-commerce, you look at the adoption of cash on delivery, still reasonably high, but it's coming down. The government's working very, very hard, like Dubai, UAE rather, to be able to sort of set up a cashless society. But just for a moment, I'm just going to touch on the impact to a customer's margins, because really we're talking about building a profitable business. you think you got that cross-border piece. Transportation could be anything between 10 and 25% of the value of the order, depending on the category and the item value. Then you think about the customs clearance, depending if it's over or under de minimis. You've now got VAT at 15%. Effectively, that order doesn't get delivered. You've got the reverse logistics coming back in. And on top of it, you've got returns ratios that could be anything up to, potentially 40%. So if you imagine as a business, how can you run a profitable business, continuing to, keep repeat customers when, they've not effectively, maybe purchased from you the first time, it may be the second time, third time they get blacklisted. So if you think about the investment you've had to spend to get that customer to come to your site, I'd say that moving away now from the cash. So I think that's a sort of three-pronged approach. I think it's really about educating the consumer, accessibility of great payment options that we're seeing. And I think we're now seeing governments really, really try and push that as well to in and around the region to provide a cashless society. So we're seeing a lot of companies move away from selling cash COD as an option on their site.
We already have a question here which says, which is from Rami Hadiz. He says, do we see a shift from COD to online payment locally as well? To my knowledge, and before pandemic, the preferred method of payment is through COD. So again, I think it's gone into that COD question, but is it changed or not changed? Is it going to shift once the pandemic, we are in a post-pandemic phase, so to speak?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can give you the answer from my point of view. I mean, but the guys who on the digital payment side may have a better insight.
Deepak?
So I can talk through them. So I think two things, right? I think one is, and put ourselves as a consumer rather than payments or an industry, right? The one thing in COVID you didn't definitely want to do is have that interaction and hand over cash and count the change, right? So that's definitely caused a shift. I think there are no two ways about it. In fact, just seeing the volumes on some of the categories like grocery, food ordering, etc., very clearly there's a shift. I think to Ben's point and the question asked, I think there would still be some categories, and those categories probably during the pandemic didn't probably have the kind of growth than in normal times, like apparel, etc., where people want to try and exchange stuff, right? So that's something that only time will tell. But I think there's definitely a reasonable, and this is our interaction with our various partners as well. I think on certain segments of e-commerce, definitely cash on delivery has come off quite significantly, thanks to the pandemic. Will it settle down at the same levels post-pandemic? Time will tell, but I'm sure it won't go back to the levels we saw pre-pandemic. I'm fairly sure of that.
Oh, sorry. So Rami Halis wants to just clarify. He's saying among locals. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. So among locals, he meant. So locally, is it still? And I think that's the same, Deepak, I would say, right? It's the same.
I'm talking about the UAE market.
Yeah.
If it is segment specific, I wouldn't be able to venture a guess, but I think across the board, and this is across talking to our customers and the feedback, I think across the board, we are seeing the shift.
Let's to move into a little bit further, to explore it further. Now, let's start from scratch. So let's say a startup who wants to set up, do we have and move into the e-commerce space? Do we have all the infrastructure that's required for them to be profitable at this point in the UAE, in Dubai? DeVere, what would you say? Do we have the infrastructure that's needed as an ecosystem to support them?
I think, in terms of infrastructure, let's start off with the basics. A business needs an office, to run their business from. Within the free zones, that can be from a smart desk for very small players to dedicated offices for teams of 6 or more. Now that comes with the necessary e-commerce trade license and visa to enable them to run an online business within the region. You also need to have scalable digital e-commerce ecosystem with features and functionality that caters for the needs of a business and a growing base. And I'm going to touch also on tech before, I talk about, the physical aspects of an infrastructure to run it. Brands, retailers also need an e-commerce platform, for example, Magento, Shopify, Salesforce, among others, that are fully integrated into ERP, merchandise management system, payment gateways and order management systems. They're all available off the shelf today. Then when we start looking into the physical aspects, fulfillment centers, warehousing, Dubai CommerCity, we've got this as, you can find fulfillment centers and warehouses on the mainland as well. But, to have an infrastructure in place also has to have a WMS to enable online picking of orders and handle online returns back to the warehouse. And then you need to have a 3PL or last mile courier, such as, DHL, who Ben represents here today, or they've got an opportunity to own their own delivery fleet to deliver their online orders. Now, in addition to all of this, there are 5 other areas of consideration, around the infrastructure of to run online. That's potentially an outsourcing of the contact center or in-house customer services to deal with customer services via phone, email, or instant messaging, building a digital studio for content generation, having an online merchandising and marketing team to manage online trading and content production and translation, SEO and performance marketing activities. Now, they are fundamentally the core infrastructure you need to have an online business. Now, with Dubai CommerCity, we already have this complete infrastructure in place. And this is the purpose of what Dubai CommerCity is. It's more than just a free zone. So rather than simply providing offices and warehousing to facilitate clients' business setup needs, we've gone about developing an ecosystem that enables e-commerce. It's what I like to call e-com in a box, where you not only get a space for an office or warehouse to set up your business, but also all the relevant support you need to take your business online. Other than complete business setup and custom support, Dubai CommerCity also offers e-commerce strategy consulting, guidance and e-commerce regulations in the region, end-to-end logistics solutions inclusive of warehousing and last mile delivery, complete e-commerce platform solutions, digital marketing services, and other support services, including but not limited to photo studios, content translation, call centers, amongst others. So in summary, Dubai CommerCity can offer a full turnkey one-stop e-commerce solution to support the services to enable brands and retailers to build and launch an online store in as short and optimal time as possible, something that is now a priority due to the ongoing pandemic and increasing growth of customers that have moved to purchase online.
There's a question here. It says in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi, I think, on mainland, can we open an e-commerce company without local sponsorship and have 100% ownership?
Well, in Dubai CommerCity, given that we are a bonded free zone, absolutely 100% ownership applies. Currently in the mainland, it's not possible to open an e-commerce company without local sponsor.
Okay. Hope that answers your question. I think that's from Sin. Ben, a question for you here. With returns almost close to 40%, what would you say are some of the challenges faced in DHL supply chain in terms of operations costs, order management, fulfillment, and how are you dealing with that? So I would link it to what deVere said about, for a startup as well, this part of the supply chain, handling the supply chain is a big key element. And last mile delivery. I know we constantly refer to last mile delivery because that's a big buzzword for us. But so when it comes to logistics, how can operators ensure that they have a complete and neat supply chain? Is it that they partner? Is it best for them to partner with a third party provider like DHL? Is it best? We've seen a lot of e-commerce pure play players have their own logistics fleet as well. So what works best in your opinion?
Yeah, sure. Look, I don't think it's one hat fits all. I think it really is, dependent on the customer and their business and really what segment they're in. But I think if you look at supply chain as a whole, when I use a lot of analogies, the way I describe it is almost like a full 100-meter race. I mean, you've got all the legs and everyone always remembers the final mile. And that's the only point that really makes the difference, the customer experience. But you've got 3 other people doing that race with you that, obviously make the last mile very successful. So I think the first point deVere touched on was the, the fulfillment, the actual buy. So in terms of, we've seen, especially during COVID, a lot of companies had a single supplier from a single country. Effectively, they couldn't source their products, or the product production times or availability of products were stretched, or the air uplift costs just become unmanageable, so it impacts their margins. So I think having an agile supply chain, you obviously want then from a fulfillment point of view to have this biggest possible catalog, but at the same time you don't want to have a lot of stock that's depreciating. So it's making sure that you have a very good setup with different suppliers to be able to operate the just-in-time model. So effectively, you then use all these data points. So to your point, if you have an integrated supply chain, you'll seamlessly be able to use this information about your customers' sort of buying habits, about what's actually happening in the warehouse in terms of stock management, to be able to sort of design your buying and procuring and set up your suppliers. And I think from the fulfillment point of view, as deVere spoke about, we partner with Hellman's with the DCC project, and really that's a turnkey solution. So for a small or medium business who wants to be able to set up without basic, bringing on a lot of extra cost, things like, fitting out a warehouse, racking, bringing on manpower. I mean, that's a big challenge, especially in e-commerce, because you get, different seasonality, you've got different campaigns. If you're starting to go global, you could have different peak times. You could be working 24 hours a day. So effectively, you've got to be able to meet those sort of demands. And I think then you've got the sort of marketing side and the digital payments, which I won't spend a lot of time on. But I think that last piece really is then the final mile, which is the only physical touch point in the delivery chain. So effectively, for an e-commerce customer to be successful, they need customers to repeat buy. If they're spending a lot of money to acquire the traffic and obviously doing a conversion, they need that customer to keep coming back to make it profitable. So a lot of that is really about delighting the customer. And as I sort of touched on earlier, it's really about what we see now as that customer experience. And I think the last point I'd make is having that centralized stock, and then obviously being able to market the business to other countries. Effectively, you need a partner who can then help you go into new markets. So as we spoke about, we're seeing these hypermarkets in and around the region, but also further afield. There's a lot of opportunities that companies can tap into in other markets using, a central sourced warehousing structure where they've got procurement into that warehouse. They're reducing their operating costs. At the same time, they're able to increase their top line revenue by expanding with their partner into other parts of the world. So I think using those data points, having a seamless supply chain, really making sure really what is a fast moving products and really on the buyer. I think having a holistic view of your business will ensure that you're able to grow and ensure that you're able to achieve your bottom line objections, what you're looking for.
One of the points that Ben just mentioned, Pankaj, is about digital payments as well. How complex or not, just to understand now. So we've discussed infrastructure. We've also discussed the last mile, and not just the last mile, the entire supply chain side of it. But from a digital payment side, how easy or not, how complex is the system right now that's there in the UAE, let's say from an e-commerce player?
So again, if you talk about trend lines, it has significantly started to simplify. I think one important lesson, and when we talk about businesses, I'll talk about small businesses separately than the big ones. The COVID has especially been harder on the smaller businesses. A lot of these businesses were single channel by the very nature, so they were just operating out of brick and mortar. So they've been especially very hard hit. And what that sort of inspired the digital payments fraternity to do is to look at how do we get businesses started to be omni-channel by default, right? So that's become very important. So when we look at now enabling digital payment capabilities, we are very keen on creating a better synergy between the issuing aspect of the business, which is the small businesses or the businesses need to receive money, and manage their money through a bank account, to also, requirements around things like acceptance, payment acceptance. How do they get a POS terminal? How do they set up themselves online? And we are seeing a proliferation of now solution providers, payment services providers who are bridging this gap. So to make acceptance solutions that are more omni-channel. So we are definitely working with some very interesting solution providers. We are seeing leading providers from other markets make an entry into UAE, which is also a very healthy sign. So that's also very good. And as Mastercard, we ourselves, because we work with a variety of stakeholders, we have come up with a solution, I think almost complementing to what deVere was saying, of e-commerce in a box. We have a solution which is SME in a box, so it's really about helping the small businesses get ready and running faster, so they get an instant card issuance, which I think has become very critical. People's, the business and the individual's ability to get a card to start making making payments and accepting payments. So we have also brought in a solution called Tap on Phone, which actually makes your regular phone, smartphone, as a POS acceptance device as well. So you can accept contactless payments through a smartphone as well. So we think that these kind of solutions, whether it's cash on delivery, as Ben was talking about, or even solutions to enable small businesses, we are seeing more of these come up. They are now live, they're operating, and they're in scale up mode. So I think a lot of these moving parts are now becoming one consolidated whole. This inner box is actually quite interesting, and it's really the demand of the market, and we are seeing more of it happen in UAE for sure.
And Deepak, from your perspective, what have you seen? You're the other side of it in a sense. So how complex or not? I recall speaking to a startup again. This was like probably, I would say, close to 9 years, at least 9 years ago. I remember interviewing somebody who was setting up an e-commerce business. Then they just about set up. And one main challenge they said was, ensuring that they have links with banks and ensuring that they have good digital payment platforms in place. And those were big challenges they faced at that point. But has that changed significantly in your opinion?
See, I'd go with a lot of what Pankaj has said. Right? I think the market has definitely become very conscious. I think deVere's organization as well has also been driving it, right? So it's good to see. I think people understand that e-commerce is the next frontier. You'll see a lot more mushrooming of companies in the SME space on e-commerce, and I think it is now. I think even the banking industry is going through a phase on figuring out how to get the right process, onboard fast. To Pankaj's point, give out instant approvals, have the right payment platforms in place. And I guess over time, it's not just necessarily the payment piece you spoke about would go down to even integrating with a banking account. I'm sure that's only probably a matter of time till we see that in this market. So there's definitely a conscious movement. Unfortunately, the thing has all come in a rush, right? It's all March 2020 changed everything for all of us on this call, right? So a lot of banks are reacting. It's definitely trying to put in place the right processes and support that we can offer to the various e-commerce players. And also, I think we are also, as a payment provider, if I look at it as a cards business, we're also seeing a lot more of newer, younger merchants coming and talking to us on wanting to talk to our customer base. So that's definitely means that you're seeing a lot more new players entering this market. So that's, I think, credit to the ecosystem that's getting developed.
I think there's a few questions. I'll just, this is a question from Ithar Al-Tine. This is probably for you, deVere. Is there a required minimum capital for opening a company in Dubai CommerCity? Is the question from...
I think it varies. Oops, I've got feedback. It varies from license to license. For example, general trading has a higher minimum capital than other types of licenses. But if the individual wants to message us directly, we can go through each one of these with the person.
Okay, and what kind of licenses? So this is a general question. What kind of licenses do I need to obtain for reselling on e-commerce platforms like Amazon and Noon?
I think it depends on the kind of facilitation needed by the company, and the license would vary. But specifically here, Dubai CommerCity, an e-commerce license is a must.
We'll go back to another point that I mentioned at the start. We saw, and you've all kind of touched upon it in a sense, but we also saw challenges during this pandemic where some of the players in the market just could not cope, and we've seen a lot of them shut shop. So. Which kind of also brings us close to our first question, the main topic of profitability, because if you're not going to be profitable at some point, the money's probably the investment could dry up, and then you're forced to shut shop. So what are the biggest challenges and how can they be overcome in the industry? Ben, what would you say?
Yeah, look, from my point of view, I think, it's a lot easier now to raise money. I think there's a lot of investment and excitement in the industry for sure. I think a lot of investors, from my personal opinion, want to see a quicker return and want to see a company can realize profits. So I think from a business point of view, part of my job that I really, really love is listening to a startup or a company and really hearing their story. People talk with so much passion, they spend so much time really sort of understand the market, and you can learn so much. So but I think they've really got to figure out how they stand out. What is their storyline? Really, what's the purpose? And I think really from that's really going to excite investors, not just to see the profit, but how does that business stand out from the crowd, especially when they're selling highly commoditized products. If you're selling other people's brands and not your own, how can you really, deliver an experience or something that really touches the hearts and minds of a customer or solve a problem? So I think with that, then obviously it's easier then to get investments. But I think at the same time, this is my point about sort of profitability and the whole supply chain. Companies now have got to reach a level of profitability, very quickly. And it takes a lot of investment to mobilize an e-commerce business. So, using other people's expertise, like we spoke about with SME in a box, as an example, all these things will, help the customer to get mobilized with expertise. The same really what deVere was sort of talking about in terms of, facilities like Dubai CommerCity, being able to support those customers, add into the whole ecosystem, not only provides expertise, but provides a lot of different solutions where historically customers would have to go off and have all those different links and then basically have to have experience in those areas where they may not. And obviously it costs a lot of money to get mobilized. So I think now with all that expertise available to them, they can set up a company, a lot less cost, be able to reach profitability a lot quicker. But I think the one thing I really want to sort of stress on is that sort of traffic. Now we're seeing it's become a lot more expensive to convert or find traffic to direct to your site. So I think the delivery promise plays a very important part to retain that customer, because you need that repeat customer coming back to drive the profitability. And that then allows you to expand and ask for more money to be able to grow into other markets, not just keep your business running.
You mentioned customer experience last time as well. So what is it when you say the word customer experience, what does that, what makes a customer a loyal customer and a repeat one?
Yeah, certainly. Well, from a delivery standpoint, I think it's really about giving the customer choice. So as a customer sort of checking out on site, at the end of the day, if they're buying a product, they also want to, in most cases, select the experience they're looking for. And in most cases now, we're seeing customers want their products quicker than ever. There was a survey done and recently, and they were saying 47% of customers said 2 days is now deemed not quick enough. So if you think when you're talking about e-commerce, for us, it's cross-border. Yes, you've got that sort of UAE market, and deVere sort of touched on the same day and the next day delivery. But from DHL's point of view, our big focus and discussions we're having is how can we help you grow? How can we keep you growing your business? As an e-commerce company, you've got to keep growing markets. You've got to stay ahead of the curve. What markets are exciting? Last year, we helped customers connect seller to buyer to over 220 countries. So, the e-commerce, industry is flourishing. And if you think about it from a brand point of view, if a customer's purchasing from that site for the first time, they may know the product, but they don't know the website. If they see an integrator like DHL, who they're used to receiving orders through, that will also help the conversion. And they know they're going to get a consistent delivery performance. So it's not just a speed element, because people want it yesterday, but they want the consistency. And the big problem we're seeing global supply chain is, I'll give you an example. If you look at Dubai today, we used to use 200 commercial flights a day. We're now operating with 100. So DHL's recently purchased seven Boeing aircrafts recently to service the region. And that's because of demand. But if we're not able to connect that seller to the buyer, and we're seeing now, like, for example, if those flights are not flying because there's COVID, therefore there's no commercial, that supply chain leg gets stopped. So then that customer will say, well, actually, I may not buy from there, I buy from somewhere else. So it's the consistency of delivery as well as the speed. And I think the customer then needs to have the option to be able to choose the experience they're looking for. And one of the tools we have is on delivery demand. So the customer effectively, when we receive a notification, and they can pretty much choose the experience they're looking for, when they want it delivered, do they want it picked up, do they want to deliver it to an alternative address. So effectively, we're delivering our customer's promise to their customer. And being the only physical touch point, we need to ensure that we understand the customer's behavior, really what they're looking for, and delight them and deliver against that promise. And if we do that and we do a good job, the customer's more likely to come back and repurchase.
Pankaj, I'll come to you. I mean, one part of it is the customer experience. It's really interesting to see from a delivery perspective as well. But I'm sure digital payments is a huge part of it in terms of customer experience as well. So 2 questions. One is the profitability, and how is it linked to a customer experience as well?
Yeah, so it's a very important question. I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback. Yeah, so it's a very important question because one thing we are definitely observing in our data as well. If you look at the penetration of number of merchants within a category that is used by the same card holder, we did a quick analysis, and we are seeing that people are going to different merchants in the same category more frequently when transacting online, right? So online formats give you the ability to quickly scroll, toggle, and make your choices even faster. So loyalty is going to be a very exciting area. It is going to become even more important as more customers head into online. And to Ben's point, user experience is extremely important. I think those days of linking loyalty only to the points you earn are also in question. Ecosystem and value-based loyalty are going to be very important. Experience-based loyalty, to Ben's point, great delivery, great experience is going to be extremely important. So what does that mean for the digital payments business? We are, absolutely looking at more context-driven decisioning. So consumers, if they're transacting from the same phone, from the same geolocation, they shouldn't really be hassled to prove themselves at a greater level. So we are trying to look at making sure that payment experiences are improved to drive consumer loyalty. So that's one. And Mastercard's been heavily investing in artificial intelligence as well as other decisioning assets to make sure that we do not harass customers with additional needs to authenticate and prove that they are who they claim to be, and sort of depend more on the intelligence. So that's one part which we are following to make loyalty and consumer experience better in e-commerce, so that merchants can actually benefit while the payment is happening, because cart abandonment is a big problem in online, right? So when a customer walks into a store, the chance that if they've picked up the goods, they're going to pay for it is pretty high. That doesn't work necessarily in the same way in the online environment, and we really need to sort of make sure that payment experience is really snappy and easy. So I'll come back to the card on file part. That's extremely important for the businesses. So it isn't a sustainable solution that I, as a customer, will keep storing my card with different merchants, right? It just sounds wrong. I mean, if you think about your own self, you ask yourself, how many places have you kept your card? Now you don't remember. Is that a good solution? Is that the way e-commerce is going to grow? And we believe not. That's not the way. So coming back to experience, we as an industry have said that this needs some normalization. And we've come up with a solution called Click to Pay. This is an industry standard which works across schemes. So this is not a Mastercard specific solution. Think of it like contactless. Every card is going to support it. And what Click to Pay does is it sort of eases the customer's worry to keep their card with different merchants. So we are looking at a solution where I go to any merchant and I'll see this Click to Pay button. And when I select that Click to Pay button, if I'm transacting from a trusted device in a trusted location, and a lot of other intelligence baked behind it, I'll just see my card and I can just say pay with it, and I'm done. And the sheer power of that to sort of reduce cart abandonment rates and improve the merchant's business is quite spectacular. So we're very excited about that. So that's the value for the merchant.
Sorry, I'm just interrupting you, but the security side is when you bring this up, that's the fear that's there. So is that taken care of as well?
Absolutely. So like I mentioned, this solution is backed by industry grade, standards, number one. So which ensure a lot of the security already pre-built into it. Plus, we are looking at other intelligence-based, both physical and soft data-based security decisioning. Of course, the consumer is obviously in control throughout the transaction as well. So there's been a real big, you may say a quantum jump in terms of how security is being applied to keep the transaction safe. And most importantly, for the consumer. So we talked about the value to the merchant. Cart abandonment goes down, customer experience improves, loyalty can be driven. For the consumer, the value is that you don't need to keep cards with merchants you don't interact with very frequently, which may be the new reality in an e-commerce world. You can just store your card in one place. And the most important thing, if you're a bank, thinking from Deepak's point of view, if the customer tomorrow gets a new card, gets upgraded, or the card changes, automatically the same card can then be refreshed and it can be used at all these merchants. So we're sort of looking at these kind of solutions to make e-commerce better user experience to drive better loyalty.
And that in turn will boost profitability, you think?
Absolutely. So, like I said, the merchants, the whole driver for them to reduce cart abandonment is to increase their sales and profitability.
Deepak, I'll pull you in here. He mentioned about banks as well. So from a cards perspective, what are the kind of innovations that you're doing, one, to support players in the market to, again, I mean, we'll link it back to profitability. How can they ensure profitability through all of these various means?
So I'll try and keep it simple. Right? I think whatever we saw many years ago in a mall or a point of sale kind of environment is actually repeating itself, but in a different way on e-commerce, right? So as a bank, from our perspective, I think it's two or three aspects, right? One is confidence during each transaction, like Pankaj said. So what we try and ensure is, one is how do we keep the customer experience seamless through means Pankaj spoke about. In fact, how do we try not to necessarily make the experience more difficult by adding in additional authentication, right? So if I can authenticate using the device and other means, I would skip sending that SMS, which you end up waiting for in a lot of cases, right? So we try and see how we can make the customer experience seamless there. Second part is how do we ensure every time the customer uses the card, as long as it's the right customer, how do we give a higher authorization rate, right? That's important because customer wants to be sure the card is working every time he or she is on the site. I think from an e-commerce partnership perspective, I think partnership has been another way a good part of this industry has grown, right? Because the e-commerce partner with the bank, there's a sense of credibility to the customer. So you're able to take something to the customer. Probably for the e-commerce player, it drives down the cost of acquisition. For the bank, it ensures repeat use on different sites. So that's another thing that we work very, very closely with e-commerce partners. And I think at the end of the day, all of us know the value of data. I think if you can look at all the various things that we spoke about, cart abandonment, authorization problems, customers who had fraud in the past, and try and resolve some of these issues. And I'm sure deVere and Ben have other issues that come with the entire ecosystem. So we're talking about purely the payment part of it. If between Pankaj and me, we are able to take these and ensure that when the customer makes that payment, it goes through seamlessly. There is no fraud, and the customer has confidence in doing the next transaction, and also bring some good e-commerce players into the market. I think it's a fair job done.
And deVere, I'll pull you in here. Your perspective on bringing profitability. How can I mean, we've mentioned about customer experience as well being a huge element to it. But what are the other elements to ensure a startup or even a brand, that a retailer that's venturing into e-commerce, can be profitable?
Yeah, I'm glad you've asked this question, because I have a simple saying: watch the fiddles and the dirhams will watch themselves. So from the off, I think you need to instill in the team, whether they're working in a corporate or a privately owned business, to think big and act small. So therefore, make the decision as if it's your own business. Now, the great thing about working in e-commerce is that if something is not working in line with your expectations, you can tweak it and see what the results is in real time. Therefore, I encourage the try and try again mentality until you get the results you're looking for. I've learned from very early on in my career that e-commerce is not about the GM percentage, so the gross margin percentage of what you're selling. It's about ensuring that you make a positive margin at an order level. Knowing the true cost of fulfilling an order is the most important piece of information that anyone in the online business should know, which will drive the correct behavior to ensure profits are maximized for each and every order. Now, other considerations to drive profitability are, first and foremost, don't overinvest in building or trying to do everything yourself. For example, at Dubai CommerCity, we offer plug-and-play solutions such as pre-configured and pre-integrated e-commerce platforms, which simply requires a brand logo and you'll be up and running online within weeks. Multi-client warehouse facility operated by Hellman Logistics, which is on a pay-as-you-go model. Last mile delivery through our partnerships with the likes of DHL, and office facilities that can cater for growth plans with all e-commerce services under one roof. Now, all these services I've mentioned all come with pre-negotiated rates and SLAs, which mean lower costs and more profit for the client. Secondly, what products are you going to sell online? Now, why is this important? Well, certain products attract higher returns for order cancellations. For instance, it's not unusual to experience return levels in the region of 40% with fashion goods. And whenever you look at beauty and cosmetics, you need to be mindful of the area that we live in, because with the extreme high temperatures during the summer months, this can actually lead to damaged soil products ending up at the customer's doorstep. Now, high returns drive higher fulfillment costs, as you're having to pay for the reverse logistics from other couriers. Third point I'd like to mention, I'm glad you've been talking about COD or cash on delivery. In this region, I still think this is a must-have payment option. And I think it's a lot of it is around cultural, but be aware that orders that are placed in this way usually attract higher order cancellations and returns, which therefore drives up delivery cost. And finally, I'd like to touch on the subject of marketing, as it's likely to be one of the largest operating expenses of any e-commerce business, especially if you're a relatively new brand. Now, rather than just relying on performance marketing activities to drive traffic to their own brand.com, which can prove to be quite costly. And in the past, I've witnessed CIR, CTSs, A2S, it's all a ratio around cost to revenue. In an established business, I've witnessed, and in my 21 years of e-commerce, I've witnessed rates of in the region of 5 to 8%, and for startups, this can actually be 20 to 25%. So therefore, they must also look to sell products through other platforms. And I've, whilst I've been talking, I've noticed a question on this, whether it should just be a brand.com that you're selling on, so their own .com or marketplaces. I believe that you have to have a multi-platform strategy. So selling on generalist marketplaces such as Amazon and Noon, or if you're a fashion brand, selling on fashion marketplaces such as Namshi is a must. You also need to consider social commerce platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, and WhatsApp, because social commerce is growing very, very fast. And then finally, an area where you can pay on a cost per acquisition basis is around influencers or affiliates, because selling via CPA is a lot more profitable than selling via CPC, because you're not in control of a potential sale on a cost per click. So therefore, it's really important to invest in a full 360 e-commerce solution, which will help to drive profitable growth from the outset. And I believe here at Dubai CommerCity, we've developed an ecosystem to support all our clients to achieve this goal.
Thanks, deVere. You answered the question from Shahabia. I was just going to bring that up because it's interesting. There is always that question about, again, there's another question follow-up saying, can we get to see the platform on CommerCity, the software platform as well that you mentioned?
Absolutely. If you just make an appointment with the team here, with the sales, business development, and my product and innovation team, we can actually show that to any client willing to either have a Teams call, Zoom call, or come and see us here at Dubai CommerCity.
Another question from Sana as well. What do you think about Shopify as an e-commerce platform in UAE?
Look, Shopify is one of a leading set of e-commerce platforms that are suitable for small or medium-sized businesses. It's low cost, however, dependent on how much you want to customize it. So obviously, the further you get into customization, it can become quite costly. I put Shopify in the same kind of ballpark as Magento. And both of those are okay platforms, but dependent on how big you want to become. If you want to become a $50 million, $100 million plus e-commerce business in 2-3 years time, I think you need to be looking at some of the enterprise solutions such as Salesforce or a product from Oracle or Hybris.
I'll go to one of the first questions. I realize we just have 5 minutes. So any questions, any of you have, feel free to ask them. But I'll just take this question from Noor, who's from DHL, says, we often face a challenge with prospects or newly startup business owners, where the process of getting their payment gateway approved takes a lot of time and we can't do anything to push the process further. Can banks offer more flexibility on this topic in order to facilitate a smoother process for e-commerce businesses. I know this is not direct to you, Deepak, but what would you say? I mean, in response.
I think it is emerging, and the way the rest of the panel has also spoken it. So e-commerce has scaled dramatically. Obviously, there are, given the number of startups and obviously the sheer space, a lot of understanding also from banks is going into this, right? It's everybody has to learn together to be able to give a better decision. So while like you rightly said, it's not directly in my area, I know for the few payment gateways we work with, there have been a lot more of e-commerce entrants than before. Yes, it is a time-consuming process, but I know that at each stage they're learning and trying to fine tune. I'm not saying stay patient, but I know that we've come a long way in the last 8 to 9 months on the number of customers who've been onboarded onto payment gateways and the speed at which they're getting onboarded onto payment gateways. Maybe deVere has some comments in case he's heard feedback, but I know that it is improved definitely, and a lot more work is happening on how do you do that instant onboarding, right? Which is, at the end of the day, you want the customer to onboard with the right documents as long as you're able to validate the entire piece. So I think work is happening. It's in process, but I think we are headed in the right direction there.
deVere, so let's say somebody who wants to set up in CommerCity, would you be supporting them in this process as well?
I think the uniqueness and USP of Dubai CommerCity is that we're here to support any business from scratch, or whether they've got an existing e-commerce business, to help, develop it and grow it with them. Essentially, Dubai CommerCity, like I said, is a free zone on steroids. It's got every single service that you require, be it either through payment gateway, contact center, performance marketing, etc. Come to us. We'll talk to you and we'll help you and support you in your e-commerce journey.
I mean, I'm sure I'm going to go back with e-commerce on steroids in my head after this discussion. But here we have some more questions. I have some eco-friendly products for testing in this market. Is there a possibility for doing some research before, as to understand the demand in the market and further invest into the complete portfolio? deVere, this would probably be you. I mean, is there any possibility for those looking to venture into it to get an understanding beforehand?
Yeah, I'm looking at the question here. Look, I love talking to people that want to launch eco-friendly. Dubai CommerCity has been born on our eco credentials, because we've put solar panels on our warehousing to support the generation of green energy to cool our warehouses. We do a lot of stuff in here in terms of no plastics, etc. Launching products. My recommendation is, you can start with small investment. List the product on the likes of Noon or Amazon if they don't already have an online business. But like I said in my previous example, you can't just purely rely on listing your product through marketplaces, because these are generalist marketplaces. One thing that the Middle East doesn't have is marketplaces that are category centric. So you are lost within, the plethora of 3 million, 4 million SKUs on the likes of Amazon and Noon. However, to get an online business off the ground, you can get it off the ground as a .com relatively cheap today. And again, if they want to come meet us at Dubai CommerCity, we will understand their needs, be able to build an online store for them relatively cheaply. And then they can store the products here within Hellman's multi-client warehouse within Dubai CommerCity, which is a pay-as-you-go model. So if they put 10 cube, 100 meter cube, etc., of the, it is very, very flexible in terms of trying to come in at a low-cost operation. So my recommendation would be, if they don't want to overcommit in terms of building an online store, get the product onto Noon or Amazon today and test the market. It is a cheap way of doing it, and you're only paying a seller fee when you sell the product. So it's coming back to a cost per acquisition model rather than going out and investing heavily in Google AdWords or Facebook, etc.
I think this kind of also relates to this point. What's the distinct advantages available to large and well-established players like Amazon or Noon through Dubai CommerCity? since they would already have optimized their systems and warehouse spaces? This is from Anand.
Well, yeah, Amazon and Noon are, you know, they're giants in this market. You know, thankfully, you know, Souq.com, when it was born back in 2014, really accelerated the push to getting other players to launch their own e-commerce, you know, product. You know, I think, you know, we're not a marketplace at Dubai CommerCity. Sure. We enable and we facilitate, you know, to get online up and running. It comes back to that, you know, you can try to choose to do this on your own, and it'll probably end up being, you know, if you don't have very much e-commerce experience, it may fail. Whereas you can come to the likes of Dubai CommerCity, where I've been in e-commerce for 21 years. I'm building up a team at Dubai CommerCity. They've all had e-commerce experience, are here to support you. So, you know, give us the product. We put it into a warehouse. You're not mixed in with everything else within Noon or Amazon. We'll get you an online store up and running, and we'll support you and direct you in terms of being able to deliver results that you'd hopefully also get through selling on a generalist marketplace. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think this also answers the question. There's a question about, is the work environment at Dubai CommerCity slated or envisioned to be different in any manner? So, I mean, I think that...
Look, I've come to this job because I want to create the Facebook or the Google in the Middle East. Yes, I'm wearing a corporate, you know, I'm looking very corporate today, but, you know, if you come over to Dubai CommerCity, you'll think it's like a university campus. It's in the Ramool area. It's very, very modern. Yes, the Ramool area is very dated. It's got a lot of industrial zone, but this is, you know, the government's attempt now to redevelop, you know, our joint venture partner, this is a $1 billion joint venture partner where we want to completely redevelop the Ramool area. So this, I believe, firmly believe this will become the trendy, funky place to come and work and live, you know, to do your job within e-commerce. So in the future, I see people walking into the reception area. There'll be a DJ there. You know, there'll be people running around in t-shirts, shorts, flip-flops. I think with the pandemic, we've all learned what it was like to work at home. You know, so you're sitting in your shorts, you're sitting in your t-shirt, and I want to bring the home working experience back into the office. And that's where the young of today will want to come and work. So that's, you know, that's where you'll see a very, very big difference of working and having your business set up in Dubai CommerCity versus elsewhere in Dubai.
Okay, you've sold it to me, so I don't mind coming in my t-shirt and my pajamas and coming there. I think just a couple of questions and then we'll wind up since we are a little bit, we're 5 minutes over time, but there's a question, what kind of licenses do I need to obtain for reselling on e-commerce platforms like Noon and Amazon?
I think
you've answered that a little earlier. Yeah. And what, I mean, I don't know if this is a generic question, but it says, what is e-payment gateway and how does it work? So I'm not entirely sure what exactly they meant, but from maybe Pankaj, Deepak, you can take that on. So I'm guessing if they want to set up an e-commerce space, how do they go about the e-payment gateway platform?
Sure. I think if the question is what is an e-payment gateway and what does it do? So the e-payment gateway is basically helping the merchant to be able to collect payments online. So there is a bit of work behind that. You've got to have a bank behind you, which will collect the funds. You've got someone in front who is integrating the ability to securely accept payments on your website. There are lots of rules around how data and privacy needs to be tackled, going back to your earlier point on security. So it's not as if anyone can start accepting card data and processing payments. So these are certified and highly well-managed companies that make sure that card payments are done securely. So these companies, they specialize as e-payment gateways. Additionally, they also help merchants with additional functions like settlement, analytics, and also sometimes even better things like how to think about the payment experience. So there are a variety of payment service providers And within those payment service providers, payment gateways is a sub-functionality.
I think that should answer the question. There's one more question. Are those card payment companies PCI DSS compliant?
Of course. So those are the standards we were mentioning. There are data security standards of the payment card industry. They apply both for card issuers as well as acquirers. And of course, these companies only upon due certification are allowed to talk to our systems.
Okay. I think with that, we're done. Thank you all. Very interesting questions. I think many of these people who attended, I think, are quite interested in understanding more. And all of you listening, we hope you got a lot of answers. I'm sure all of them are open to any more questions that you have. Feel free to contact us and we can always pass on the questions. With that, we come to the end of today's event. A big thank you once again to our panelists. You can access the entire webinar on our website. Do let us know all your feedback and comments. Thank you and have a great evening. Thanks a lot.